Hey everybody, welcome to the Mana Leek. I'm John as always, and I've got an interesting video today. So people have asked sort of for this for a while. People have wanted to know my top 10 draft formats or my bottom 10 draft formats, and I've always hesitated on doing a video like that just because it will change over time. A new set might come out and it might be the worst ever or the best ever, and then my list is not up to date. As well, it's really hard to rank stuff like that. I can tell you my number 1. I can tell you my number 2. Number 3? It's a little bit harder. Maybe number 3 is actually number 7. I don't know. So I didn't want to do a ranked list. So I decided on something a little bit different. I'm actually going to review, very quickly, all of the draft formats that I've ever done. So I'm going to go through, starting with Tempest, all the way up to, not quite today, because of course I do post-mortem videos now, but I'm going to quickly go over my view on all the draft formats that I've done at least a number of drafts of. We're talking 5 or more, preferably. Obviously, as we get towards Innistrad and beyond, I've done way more than 5. I've done 20, 30, 40, 50, 100, 150, who knows? Some of these older sets, my experience isn't quite as well-informed. Now, a lot of these are going to go pretty quick. I don't have too much to say about them, just a quick little what I remember about them or if I would draft them again, etc. I definitely want to hear your thoughts on all these draft formats, and especially the formats that I missed, kind of between Urza's block and Innistrad block. I kind of want to hear your thoughts on that as well, so that's what the comments down below are for. But we're going to start off with Tempest block. So this is a huge nostalgia set for me because it was the set that I got super into Magic. I'd already been playing Magic for a few years, but this set hooked me. The Weatherlight saga, the continuing story, the flavor text on the cards really mattering. This set pulled me in, but I didn't draft it. I was in grade 6 at this point in time, grade 7, I don't quite remember exactly. I didn't go to local gaming stores, we just played at recess, but I had heard about draft. I had played a game called MTG Apprentice. It was very much like Cockatrice is these days, and in it was a draft option and a sealed deck option. And I sort of toyed around with them and discovered what that actually meant and was amazed by it. I desperately wanted to draft, and then I never did. When I came back to Magic with Innistrad back in 2011, the first thing I did was jump into drafting because suddenly I could afford it, I could pay for it. Magic Online meant that I could actually just play it at home without the stress and anxiety of going out to a store. So when I got a chance to finally draft Tempest block, I jumped in because I knew these cards, I loved these cards. It's old Magic. It is old Magic. I'm talking bad cards, bad creatures, a few ludicrously insane cards, but a whole bunch of really bad ones. So you have to go into this set knowing that. You have to know that you're going to be drafting bad cards, but if you do, it's actually a really decent draft set. So good, in fact, that they actually released on Magic Online Tempest Remastered. They had a designer come in and take Tempest, Stronghold, and Exodus and crunch it down to one 264 card set, cutting out some of the utter crap and just leaving the normal crap. I would absolutely draft this again in a heartbeat. I would recommend that you try it as well. Be aware, it is old Magic. So we're going to jump ahead a little bit to 8th edition and include 9th edition and 10th edition in this as well. I haven't drafted any one of these more than once, I think, maybe twice, back when they were doing flashback drafts on MTGO, and they are awful. These sets technically were designed to be drafted, but they really weren't designed to be drafted. They're almost entirely bad cards. Sarah Angel is a rare. She was an uncommon forever, and then 7th edition came around and suddenly she was a rarer because the set was so bad that was what a rare card was. These just aren't enjoyable. There's no real difference between 8th, 9th, 10th edition or 7th. I don't think I played 7th or if it was meant to be drafted. It's nothing like the modern core sets, M10, 11, 12, etc. up to M20 coming out very shortly. Don't draft these sets. I would never draft them again. You couldn't pay me to. They're bad, bad, bad. Up next, we're going to jump all the way ahead to Ravnica block. Now, I haven't drafted this much, but I know people have nostalgia for this block pretty heavily, maybe like I do with Tempest, but I wasn't around for this. I've only done it in flashbacks. I somewhat enjoyed it the handful of times that I've done it. I've only ever done full block. I've never done triple Ravnica, for example, but it has a huge flaw. The first 2 sets have 4 guilds. The last 2 sets have 3 guilds, whereas with Return to Ravnica, we had 5-5 all, and with guilds and Allegiance, we had 5 and 5. Here you had 4-3-3, and that means that there's actually specific 3-color combinations that you have to aim for across those 3 packs. If you start out in Simic, in Ascension, blue-green, and then you take Gruul in Guild Pact, red-green. The last guild that you need to draft to finish your deck is blue-red, Izzet. But Izzet is also in Guild Pact. It is not in Ravnica, which means if you go Simic, Gruul, you have no cards in Pack 3. You have blue cards, you have red cards, you have green cards, but you can't take any of the multicolored cards, which of course are the way more powerful cards. And so you had to do this weird like memorization of, I drafted this in Pack 1, that means that I have to draft this guild in Pack 2 if I want to have any chance of drafting properly in Pack 3. Maybe that was fine back when everybody was drafting this originally, but going back to this as a flashback, I found that really unfun. But at least I knew about it, which means that I ended up with a 3-color deck that worked. So I enjoyed-ish my time with this, but that flaw and having to like memorize that map of what you're allowed to draft was not my thing. I would draft it again, but I'm not exactly on the lookout for it. We're going to have one more giant jump of time here before we start reviewing basically every set to Zendikar, the original Zendikar. It is fast. Fast, fast, fast. It is the far extreme of the fast-slow spectrum. Nah, it's just not how I like to play Magic. I like to have chances to recover. I like to have chances to fall behind and then recover. And Zendikar does not allow that. The format is over in turn 5, 6. It's just over. Some of the cool cards that are in it, like trap cards, etc., just don't really have any time to work out. I would not look to play this set ever again. It's just super not my play style. We'll see this a few more times in these reviews. I don't like super fast formats. We're going to skip World Wake because I've never drafted it. I don't know why. I guess maybe they just don't want more copies of Jace out there, so there's never World Wake Zendikar draft on MTGO, and obviously World Wake packs are expensive, so nobody does it in paper. So we're going to jump ahead to Rise of the Eldrazi. In the same block, though it was not drafted with Zendikar, it was the first time, or one of the first times, that it was drafted just by itself. It's the opposite end of that scale. You have Zendikar on the fast end. The other side of that scale is Rise of the Eldrazi. It's super slow. It's possibly the slowest draft has ever been. There's big, crazy, powerful creatures, but they cost 9 or, I don't know, 15 to cast. It's got really interesting decks like the Defender's deck. Level Up is a really cool mechanic for those that aren't powering out Eldrazi. There's a lot of fun to be had, a lot of cool archetypes. It's a really interesting draft format, and I would definitely draft it again. Rise of the Eldrazi is super good. If you get a chance, check it out. And for the final time jump, we're going to skip the Scars of Mirrodin block because I didn't really draft it to Innistrad. This is when I came back to Magic. I had picked up the Duels of the Planeswalkers on the Xbox, and a friend of mine had convinced me, because he knew that I played Magic way back in the day, to go check out a local game store for a free event, and I was hooked. I was back into it, and Innistrad had just come out, or was just about to come out, and I got Magic Online, and I learned that I could draft this thing that I wanted to do way back 11 years ago as a kid. I could finally do, and so I started drafting Innistrad. Lucky for me, it happens to be generally considered one of the best draft formats of all time as my draft format. It was my favorite, my number one, up until this year, where I decided that something else was better. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. There's so much here. Powerful cards, balanced with good removal, slow strategies work, fast strategies work. The vampire deck can crush you real fast. There's some off-the-wall archetypes like spider spawning, or even just versions of self-mill that aren't spider spawning, things like Kessig Cage Breakers and whatnot. I could draft this set forever. It's nearly perfect. Couple flaws, things like the unblockable hexproof illusionary guy that I can't remember the name of offhand, but otherwise nearly perfect set. Draft it, draft it, draft it. After Innistrad came Dark Ascension. Dark Ascension was drafted with Innistrad, and it basically diluted a good thing. Dark Ascension Innistrad drafting isn't bad. It's just not as good as Innistrad was. The cards are less good, they're less interesting, there's less off-the-wall archetypes. It's just not as good. I'd still draft it if I didn't have a choice, but if I had the choice, I would draft triple Innistrad. It's just sort of like a second-rate version of Innistrad. Fine, but it diluted a good thing. After that, we got Avacyn Restored, which had the same thing as Rise of the Eldrazi. It was not drafted with Innistrad, and it was an absolute pile of trash. I had my first experience of drafting with Innistrad, and it was incredible, and then I very quickly got to see what a bad format looked like. Weak cards. Black was designed to be played as mono black, which does not work in a draft format, and it strongly encouraged you to play one creature at a time. There was an unnamed loner mechanic in black, and it was bad. Miracles were super swingy. Bonfire of the Damned, awful. Bad set. One of the worst. Never drafting again. Maybe once to show you all how bad it was. Avacyn Restored, stay far, far, far away from it. After Avacyn Restored, I got into my first core set. That would be Magic 2013, which was in my top 5 for a fair while until more and more sets came out. It's just a really solid core set. Exalted makes a really interesting decision of attacking with your team or attacking with one creature. It's a really good introductory draft format because I think there's just enough complexity with Exalted to make it interesting without making it boring like some other core sets that we'll see. I would absolutely draft M13 again. It's just, it's my favorite core set. It's really, really, really solid. It's not amazing, but it's really solid. After that came Return to Ravnica, another former favorite set in my top 5. Ravnica sets aren't my favorite. Restrictions generally breed creativity, but they tend to make bad draft formats. Having only 5 decks being viable is generally bad, and we'll actually see that a couple more times. But similar to Ravnica Allegiance, I felt that this set at least had some guilds with multiple versions of decks. There was also the Defender deck, which was very cool. There was the Defender Mill deck, but there was also the Defender Ramp deck. Return to Ravnica was surprisingly okay for being a Ravnica set, which I think I have sort of come down on just not liking generally, but this one stands out a little bit higher. It's balanced, it's an okay draft format. I draft it again, it's just not going to be my first choice. But like I said, for a while, before I had experienced better formats, it was one of my favorites. It's fine. It's fine, we'll say. Something that was awful is Gatecrash, another stone awful set with little redeeming qualities. Boros was the way to go by a pretty massive margin. I'm talking 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, 2-drop, 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 you're dead, Boros. Orzhov was interesting but slow. The extort mechanic I love, but you just got run over typically. Dimir was very interesting in that it was very underpowered, so much so that people said it was unplayable, which meant that it was always open, which means if you were the only drafter, it was actually pretty good and you could win with it, but then if somebody else tried to draft it, it went back to being trash. It wasn't a good format. Boros was so wildly overpowered that it was just really one note. There were no interesting decks. 2 other guilds were apparently in this set, but I can't even really remember what they did. Simic, I don't remember ever really playing Simic and Evolve and whatnot. It was very fast, very one note. I'm never drafting Gatecrash ever again. After Gatecrash came Dragon's Maze, which was back-to-back awful sets. Dragon's Maze fixed the original Ravnica problem by having the last set have all 10 guilds in it, meaning you could draft whatever 3-color guild combination you wanted. If you were lucky, you might have ended up in a 2-color combination without having to memorize some sort of proper drafting map like the original Ravnica. But clue stones, there were 10 in the set, which means the average pack had 2.5. Frequently, you would have a full 3 copies of Clue Stones in your deck, meaning you just had 3 worthless cards. A bunch of weak cards, possibly getting cut in your later packs. Just such a bad format. I'm never drafting this again, and the one time I ever walked out of an LGS was when I showed up, and there weren't enough packs for a full Dragon's Maze block draft, so we were going to do triple Dragon's Maze. I left. This set's awful. Don't draft it. It's just absolutely horrible. There's a reason that sealed boxes of this set are still like $60. Modern Masters was next, but I didn't really draft it that much. I think I drafted it once, and that's going to be the same for all the Modern Masters and Eternal Masters and Vintage Masters. We'll come back to some other Masters sets later, but the Modern Masters I never touched much, so we're going to skip over them to M14. This set was okay, but it was a real step down from M13. It had slivers as the mechanic, which means there was no named mechanic. M12 had Bloodthirst, and M13 had Exalted, M15 had Convoke. This one had slivers, which aren't super interesting. These ones I think were powered down a little bit, and of course they only affected your own slivers, which is a bonus. Sliver mirror matches with the old slivers are a nightmare. But the draft format became very one note as about, I think maybe a month and a half in, people realized blue was really good. I'm talking Opportunity is a first pick, strong first pick card. Strong. Blue became the meta. You drafted blue. If you drafted blue, you were going to 3-0. If you didn't, you probably weren't. So again, another very one-note set with kind of one deck that you had to draft, and so it didn't have any lasting power, so I wouldn't go back and draft it again. It's not awful, it's just one note. Up next is Theros, which is a lot of people's formats, and I don't dislike it, but I do use Theros as the exact middle point of my good-bad scale. Theros is literally in the middle. It has enough bad things and enough good things that they balance themselves out into a format that I can say is a format that I have played. And perhaps I will play it again. Will I enjoy it? Will I hate it? It's just fine. It's perfectly balanced out fine. It's got bad stuff like battle cruiser magic that I don't really like, but bestow is actually a really good mechanic, but heroic is very snowbally. The gods are actually well designed. I think devotion's a great mechanic, and I think gods turning on via devotion is how they should work and how they should only work. Yeah, it's just a fine set. It is the middle point. I would draft it again. I wouldn't draft it again. Whatever happens, Theros is Theros. Born of the Gods came along and got added to Theros, and it was boring. The 3 sets per block structure really started to show with Theros block. It's the reason it was the last one. The set added little, if anything. It just diluted Theros, which, Dark Ascension diluted Innistrad and made the best set ever, or one of the best sets ever, less good, which is still pretty good. This made a set which was fine, just even more boring. Yeah, there wasn't much going on with Born of the Gods, and we had to draft it for another 3 to 4 months. It was basically Theros, but more boring, so I wouldn't go back to Born of the Gods. After that, we had Journey into Nyx, which was even more boring. 6 to 7 months now of drafting the same cards. And they added a few more boring cards, similar cards to the ones that we've already drafted, and we had to do it for another 3 months. By the end of this, I couldn't stand Theros. I owned 1 billion copies of every common and uncommon. It was just so boring. The final 3-set block, for a very good reason, I wouldn't draft it again. Triple Theros, sure, take it or leave it, but adding in these extra diluting boring sets, no interest. Up next is Conspiracy. Conspiracy I only drafted a couple times, but it deserves a segment here. I hate political magic. I really dislike multiplayer games. Multiplayer magic is not fun for me, probably because I've always played it at the local game store, where, humble brag, I'm one of the better players, which means that in basically every multiplayer game, I'm the first target. It doesn't matter if it's a draft and my draft didn't go well and my deck sucks, I'm the first target. And so almost every Conspiracy draft I've ever played, I've been the first target, and I've been eliminated very, very quickly. One time I held on and won, basically out of spite, I assume. But yeah, it's not fun for me just because I really dislike multiplayer magic. Perhaps if I had a group of equally skilled people who didn't kind of do this, we got to take out the strongest person first, the strongest player, not even the strongest deck first, maybe I'd like it a little bit more. And I'd actually really like to try Conspiracy 1 versus 1, because I think the draft matters cards are super cool. I, in fact, would go out of my way to buy a box of Conspiracy to do a 1v1 draft, because I think it could be super, super cool. So Conspiracy, I'd love it as a 1v1 set, but as a multiplayer set, it just wasn't for me. Back to the core sets, we have M15, which was not great. Triplicate Spirits dominated this format to such an extent that I can't even remember other cards from this set. I can't. I'm trying right now. Triplicate Spirits, another copy of Triplicate Spirits, and probably a 3rd copy of Triplicate Spirits is all I remember from this set. It was so ludicrously powerful as an uncommon. Yeah, I actually can't remember anything else from this set other than dying to that card 1 million times over. No interest in drafting this set again. It was the final of the basic core sets for a while until M19. Khans of Tarkir is up next, which is a very, 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 very interesting draft format. For a few reasons here. It was/is one of my favorites with a giant asterisk beside it. I loved the first month or two of this set. At some point, it became real cool to draft 5-color nonsense morphs, because of course you could draft all 5 colors, play them on turn 3 as colorless, and then whenever you found your mana, you could flip them over. And it became a game of sort of who opened the best bombs, because you were always going to take the most powerful bombs in every pack, and then you were going to take all the morph cards, and you were going to jam them into a deck with 5 colors of lands, and play them. And I don't like when that happens. We're actually going to come back to that a few times in upcoming reviews here. It makes draft formats very weird. The signals go wonky. You end up with bad decks and good decks because, of course, you might try to go for this and get cut. You don't open the bombs that other people open and your deck is bad, or you were drafting properly but you just can't read the signals so your deck ends up bad. It's not my favorite thing when this happens and 5-color madness goes crazy. Unfortunately, that's what people remember about this set. And so if you ever play this again on MTGO, everybody is trying to do it. And it doesn't support everybody doing this in one draft pod. It wrecks the draft pod. And then, of course, with leagues online, you have to play against people who may not have been in a train wreck of a draft pod, and you just get crushed by, surprise, 5-color good stuff. So yeah, I love Khans of Tarkir prior to that being discovered and that becoming the meta, because Morph is a great mechanic. I really, really, really like Morph. It helps with just all kinds of variance issues in Magic, and there are some really cool cards in here. The 3 colors really worked out very well, even though there were technically 5 decks. It worked out really well. I really enjoyed Khans of Tarkir if I had a time machine to go back in time to the first 2 months. So following Khans of Tarkir, we had Fate Reforged. Now, I had seen bad sets. I had seen Avacyn Restored, I had seen Gatecrash, and generally a bad set meant that it was really, really fast. I hadn't really experienced a set where the cards were way, way, way too good. I hadn't really experienced a Prince set before. Triplicate Spirits in M15 was good, but it wasn't end the game immediately, sorry for your luck, but please leave the store forever. Good. Citadel Siege became the most remembered and most powerful of these cards, of course, but this set became very, very, very boring very quickly because it 100% became a game of open your booster, look at your rare, did you win or did you lose? You knew basically from that moment. It was a super swingy draft format, one of the bombiest I've played, and I would not go back and draft it again. Dragons of Tarkir came along and fixed up the timeline. We threw out Khans of Tarkir, but we kept Fate Reforged, and we drafted Dragons of Tarkir with it. It was an okay set. I remember having a fair bit of success with it, specifically with Black-Red aggro. Dash was a really cool mechanic, with Goblin Heel Cutter being a great card. It wasn't super fast, it wasn't super bomby, but you still had that pack of Fate Reforged as pack 3, which means you still could be in white, open a Citadel Siege, and, well, we're back to playing Fate Reforged again. I probably wouldn't draft this again, just in case my night is ruined by a Fate Reforged rare, but it was an okay set. Up next was the final core set for a while, Magic Origins, but I don't really consider this to be a core set. It was way more complex than any core set has ever been. It was a core set because it was out in the summer. It was a core set the way Dominaria was a core set. I hated this set. It really reminded me of Gatecrash with incredibly fast decks powered by super undercosted commons, specifically Topin Freeblade. I did do some of my coolest combo-y shenanigans in this set, not once but twice, using Willbreaker with Sentinel of the Eternal Watch to permanently steal an opponent's creature every turn. I did this in 2 separate events, and it felt so good. That's one of my favorite combos I've ever pulled off in Magic. I'm so happy that I got to pull it off twice. A good memory, but a bad set. Origins is not a set I would ever draft again. Way too fast, way too powerful undercosted commons, and it just ruined kind of the fun that you could have in Magic. Battle for Zendikar was up next, and I have a foil uncut rare mythic sheet on my wall behind the green screen back there. Not because I loved the set, but it is still totally fine. To be honest, I bought that sheet because it was the one that was on sale at the time that was mythic, rare, and foiled. But I do like the set. I, in fact, love the Eldrazi lore. I love the Eldrazi. I think they're really cool. I think the designs are always really cool. I know a lot of people hate them. I adore the Eldrazi. I actually really regret that I wasn't around to experience the reveal of the Eldrazi from the Zendikar block. But Battle for Zendikar has the Eldrazi, and honestly is a totally fine draft set. Green was awful, arguably flat out unplayable. The gameplay was a little bit straightforward, but I don't hate the set. I will take a draft set that is pretty straightforward and underpowered any day of the week. I don't like oops, I win cards. I don't like I play a Planeswalker and then a second Planeswalker and then a third Planeswalker. You didn't play anything after your first Planeswalker. I win kind of draft like we're seeing right now in War of the Spark. I like kind of underpowered stuff, so Zendikar is totally fine for me. It's not amazing. I'm not going to go out of my way to draft it again, but I would. It's just fine. Oath of the Gatewatch came up next, and it gets a lot of unfair hate because, well, people hated Battle for Zendikar, and yes, green was underpowered. Oath of the Gatewatch fixed that. All the colors were draftable. All the color pairs were draftable. It was a totally fine draft set. Everything was fine. There was nothing overly broken. Everything was viable. It was just totally okay. People hate this just because they remember not liking Battle for Zendikar. I would draft this over Battle for Zendikar, given the option, of course, and I'd happily go back and draft Oath of the Gatewatch. It was just a totally fine draft format. Shadows over Innistrad is up next, and that was an interesting format. Obviously, I was excited about it because we were coming back to Innistrad, and I loved Innistrad. It was my first set when I came back, and it was such a good draft format. But I initially bounced a little bit hard off of this set. It was a very synergistic set, but a lot of that synergy was locked up at Uncommon. And being locked up at Uncommon means that you could actually have a draft pod where the card you needed for your deck to work wasn't in your pool. No one opened one. Or somebody took the one that you needed. And so you would end up with a deck that was way underpowered compared to the people who did get the uncommons that were necessary for their deck to work. So I got stomped a lot at the start of this set. Eventually I got a little bit of a handle on it, and it was generally pretty fine. It doesn't stand out to me as a great set, but I'd go back and draft it. It was totally fine, and of course, I love Innistrad. I love everything to do with Innistrad, so I can't hate this set, but it was just fine. Eldritch Moon came along, and surprise, it was Emrakul all of the time, and I just talked about how I love the Eldrazi. So seeing them on Innistrad was absolutely my jam. I was so hyped for the storyline of this. I followed the storyline super closely, really enjoyed it, and this is a rare example of a small set knocking it out of the park. Eldritch Moon was amazing, absolutely amazing. The meld cards were a wild addition that we'd never seen before. I don't know if we'll ever see them again. There was a great blue-red spells deck, a great blue-green emerge deck. This is in my top of all time. It's near-ish the bottom of that top of all time list, and again, I don't like exactly quantifying these, so I can't tell you that this is number 8 out of 12 or something, but it is on that list towards the bottom. Just because the replayability I don't think is quite there as it is with some other sets. I don't think I would ever draft this set forever, but I'd happily go back and draft this set right now today. Kaladesh is up next, and it started a 4-set slump for me. Set after set of me hating it more and more, wondering if Magic would ever get better or if I should just quit. Funnily enough, looking back, Kaladesh, which I hated at the time, is in retrospect probably the best of those 4 sets. I found Energy annoying, didn't we all? Specifically hating the green Rhino that got unnecessarily big, unnecessarily fast. And then, of course, there were vehicles. Vehicles are awful the way they were designed in this set. They were ludicrously unbalanced with things like Renegade Freighter. Near the end of the format, I had multiple successes with the Energy Mill deck. And ultimately, I'd actually draft this set again, at least until I get run over by too many trains. I hated this set at the time. In retrospect, it was probably whatever a half step below fine is. A half step below fine for Kaladesh. Aether Revolt came along, and this took a set that I hated at the time and made it even worse. Energy was still there. The trains got even worse with Untethered Express, an absolutely unreasonable card that was even more unreasonably made an uncommon instead of a rare, or I don't know, a friggin' mythic for that matter. In addition, the pack quality fell off really fast. There were so many artifacts in this set, and artifacts, of course, despite what I just talked about, have to be underpowered or at least overcosted, unless you're a train for some reason. And so your packs would very rapidly go great pick, good pick, a pick, garbage. And you would just be stuck pushing together a deck out of trash, and it wasn't very fun. Also, Ridgescale Tusker sucked. So Aether Revolt is not a set that I would ever go back and draft. There was a lot wrong with this set, and it just wasn't my jam. Amonkhet came up next, and oh boy. I didn't play too much Zendikar. I played enough in flashback drafts to realize that it is the fast set and that I do not like that. But Amonkhet was also FAST fast. A bunch of severely undercosted creatures, especially once their exert bonuses started being factored in, and some completely ridiculous bombs like Glorybringer and the Return of Gods in their new, way easier to activate forms. As I said, Gods from Theros with Devotion, that's a fine mechanic. I think that's really cool. That's really easy to turn off one of those gods. You just kill one of their permanents. But here, Hazoret, for example, she is very difficult to turn on because she wants you to play all of your cards. Which just so happens to be exactly the red plan. Play all of your cards, and if you somehow can't, you can just pay mana to do it through her ability. The gods were unreasonable and have fully fleshed out my hatred for the creature type. Yeah, this was a bomby fast format, and that's just everything that I hate about Magic. You couldn't pay me to play this again. Put it in the pile with Zendikar and Gatecrash and Origins. I'm never touching Amonkhet ever again. Up next was the final nail in the coffin, Hour of Devastation, the fourth set in this slump of sets that I absolutely couldn't stand. Now, this is a weird one, though. A lot of people have this as their favorite set. They absolutely love this set, absolutely love it. I just don't get it. It was super bomby. It introduced even more powerful, even harder to kill gods until, War of the Spark came along. Beyond that, 5-color good stuff was one of the most popular decks, and as I talked about in cons, and as I talked about in another set that I can't remember right now, I really hate when that happens. I hate when that suddenly makes draft pods open the bombs, take them all, play all 5 colors, hope that the draft doesn't train wreck, and see how it goes. It makes it even worse online where multiple people try to do that because that's what the articles that they read told them to do, and then you get placed into league matches against people who have good decks. Not a fan. You couldn't pay me to draft Hour of Devastation again. I know that's weird. I know that this is some people's favorite draft set of all time. I just supremely don't get it. It's one of my least favorite of all time. Ixalan was up next, and it got me out of my slump. It was a set that I liked, which is again weird because people hated this set. Me and people are very, very different on Ixalan and Hour of Devastation. I really disagreed with the popular opinion that the draft was on rails and that there were only 4 decks, which is wrong. Dinosaurs had 3 decks, and Pirates had 3 decks, and the other 2 had a deck themselves. But you didn't even have to stick to a tribe. I had a lot of success with red-white tribeless aggro, basically red-white humans. There were pirates in there, there were dinosaur riders in there, a few dinosaurs would get added in. It was not a red-white dinosaur deck, there was no tribal synergy, and I crushed face with it multiple times. Yes, the hexproof merfolk stuff was pretty obnoxious, and yes, hexproof is still a mechanic that needs to go away forever, but I really enjoyed this set after over a year of feeling like every set was just going to be worse and worse. I wouldn't go out of my way to draft this set again, but if it was there, I definitely would. Tacking on to Ixalan, we had Rivals of Ixalan, which was really more of the same, but a bit bombier. I again didn't dislike Rivals as much as most people. Again, people dove into 5-color good stuff if they could with Sailor of Means, which is kind of hilarious because I did that a bunch of times in Ixalan and nobody ever caught on. I remember playing a blue-green or a blue-black deck that was splashing green and white because I had 3 Sailors. I don't know why it took people so long to catch on to it. But it wasn't quite as easy to do in the other sets, so it didn't really have the same problem that we saw in Hour or Cons. Again, I didn't find it that problematic. I don't think that you had to stick to a tribe. I think you could definitely draft off tribe. Blue-White Skies was great. Yeah, I think maybe that was a lot of people's downfall, is they looked at the set and they said, oh, it's a tribal set. I must draft this tribe. I must take all of these bad cards in this tribe. I can't take this great card because it's not a dinosaur. But You should. I actually used this set to rapidly hit Mythic on Arena just because I was able to draft it so well. I hit Mythic on Arena in like 5 days, I think, a few months ago when this was the format at the start of the month. I like this set. I think it's totally fine. I'm not running to play this set again. It would never make my best of all time list, but I think it's totally fine. Dinosaur Gods, not a big fan. I know they're not technically gods, but they kind of have the same problem. But beyond that, I think this set's fine, so totally fine for Rivals of Ixalan. Sort of up next, it actually came out between Ixalan and Rivals of Ixalan, is Unstable. Here we go. This set is incredible. I can't describe to you how good this set is. For a while, I said no. I am a serious Magic player. Innistrad is the best draft set. This one's good, I like it, but Innistrad's the best. No, not anymore. Unstable is the best draft format. It's my favorite draft format. It's the best draft format printed. The archetypes are varied. Contraptions are an awesome level of complexity. Crazy stories come out of your game. On the last streamed paper draft that I did of this, I gained literal infinite life. Not an arbitrarily large number, literal infinite life, meaning that there was no way for me to lose the game, except my opponent had the hexproof alternate win condition enchantment, and they were rapidly approaching their alternate win condition. Super cool stories come out of this. The format's incredible. It's really well designed. If you haven't played it and you've only seen Unhinged or Unglued, it's nowhere near as jokey as that. Nobody has to get up and do the hokey pokey or anything. It's actually a relatively straightforward draft set with just some slight tweaks. It's way closer to Conspiracy than it is to Unhinged or Unglued. If you haven't drafted this, get out and draft it. If I ever quit Magic, I will be keeping my cube of Unstable and drafting it forever, even though I don't play Magic anymore. Unstable, best of all time. Up next was Masters 25, the only Masters set that I drafted a number of times. I think I drafted this probably 8, 9, maybe 10 times. I really enjoyed this set and thought it was a solid draft format. I know people hated it because it wasn't the perfect representation of Magic's history, but if you thought they were going to jam this full of Moxes and Lotuses and duels, you're really bad at understanding how Magic is made. There's great cards in here. There's some real nostalgia hits, an awesome black-red sacrifice deck thanks to Phyrexian Ghoul. Just a good all-around draft set. I'd happily go back and draft this anytime. Dominaria came out, and it was another great set. If Kaladesh to Hour was a slump, I think Ixalan to Dominaria, including Unstable and Masters 25, was my rebound. Dominaria had some great cards, some well-defined archetypes. It just felt like a really, really, really good draft format. Sagas were a super cool design and addition to the game that I hope we see again at some point. I'm not sure when we will, but I hope we do. There was some bomminess to the set, things like Lyra being stupidly overpowered, and even some of the uncommons were a little bit too pushed, like Danitha, for example. Keeping on the white train, Dominaria is also one of the biggest sufferers of how wildly different arena drafting is to the real world. Red-white was never really good in Dominaria drafting. Going all the way in on enchantments, on creatures, is a recipe for disaster. Typically, your creature will get bounced or killed, and you basically lose the game at that point. But in best of one bot drafting, the bots know that they shouldn't be taking dub and such, and as such, you can take advantage of that and take all of the dubs and Valduck and etc. And you can just crush people, because without a game 2 or game 3, thanks to the joys of best of 1, you don't get to know your opponent's game plan. If I know that you're on red-white, throw 7 auras on a creature, I'm going to make sure that I hold my bounce spell until I get an aura out of you, or 2 or 3. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you have no creatures on board because I know your game plan in game 2 or game 3. And I could potentially sideboard. But in best of 1, you just have that chance to go, I'm playing creatures, or I win, bye, onto another opponent who doesn't know my plan, and I'm going to do it again. So that's my takeaway of Dominaria on Arena. I would love to draft this set again in paper. I in fact did just a couple months ago, but Arena, well, that's my review. Core Set 2019 is up next, and it's the return of the core set, and it wasn't my favorite thing ever. The Mythic Dragons, which, by the by, cycles of ludicrously powerful cards, one in every color, or a color combination, just for the sake of making sure that all the colors have one, is possibly one of my least favorite design decisions. The Elder Dinosaurs, the Gods, these Elder Dragons, it just really ups the likelihood of you seeing one every draft. as opposed to seeing one every few drafts. Not a fan of that design. But other things like Banefire's Sleep, there were a lot of games where basically you would be playing a fine game of Magic and then somebody pushes the oops I win button and the game is over. Probably intended for modern core sets to have those cards, to have a lot of those cards, because it allows new players to have these stories of beating the local pro, or LSV showed up their shop and they killed him because they drew Sleep and hit for 20 twice. Yeah, it's not my favorite way to play Magic. And again, back in the Arena world, green-white auras is ludicrously powerful in Arena because the bots don't draft white, and again, the whole thing of not having a Game 2 or Game 3. Whereas green-white auras in paper, nobody ever drafted that. It was not good. Satyr Enchanter was a bad card. Magic Arena, it's actually pretty good. So yeah, I wouldn't really draft this set again. It's an okay intro to a new player, and I do not want to play it again on Arena for sure. So that's actually going to wrap it up. I have not covered Ravnica Allegiance or Guilds of Ravnica or War of the Spark, and that's because there are post-mortem videos that you can go and check out. They'll be in the show notes below for Guilds of Ravnica and Ravnica Allegiance, where I go deep on the set, what I like, what I dislike, the art that I liked, flavor text that I like, all kinds of stuff like that. The War of the Spark one should be coming out in the next couple of weeks or so. So check that out. As I said, I want to know your draft history. What draft formats did you love? What draft formats did you hate? What did you agree with, disagree with here, etc.? Let me know in the comments down below. As always, if you like the content, and definitely let me know about this content, because I want to do more long-form content like this. Maybe get away from gameplay a little bit. Keep what I have, but not expand it, and expand this stuff instead. Let me know. Comments down below. You can always find me over at twitch.tv/SamannaLeek, Facebook and Twitter, patreon.com/SamannaLeek if you want to become a backer and help the channel out. You guys absolutely make this channel keep going. inksgaming.com, you can use the promo code MannaLeek10, all one word, 10 is the number, to get 10% off your order and help out the channel. Clicking that like button is one of the biggest things you can do. Clicking subscribe as well super helps. But if you have questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, see y'all next time.